20 million people flooded St. Louis to witness the 1904 World's Fair. Everyone was excited to see a display of innovation, logic, and technology from around the world. Ice cream cones, airplanes, and X-ray machines were the stars of the elaborate fair that took place in the modest city of St. Louis. Even more impressive than the gadgets and food were the lights that lit up the fair in a beautiful illumination powered with electricity. The fair boasted a lavish, universal event that allowed the everyday person to experience the wonders of the world. It had great cities such as London, New York, and Chicago. This was a big moment for St. Louis, one that is memorialized as the pride of the city. But beyond the cotton candy and Ferris wheels were humans on display. One of the most forgotten aspects of the fair was what is now known as human zoos. Next to the shiny lights and juicy hot dogs were humans in habitats. The human exhibitions of the 1904 World's Fair showcased the dehumanization of people considered uncivilized, which is embedded in the geographic and historical heart of St. Louis. The 1904 World's Fair has a dark secret, dubbed as the Ethnographic Expedition, Living Exhibits, Out-of-Doors Exhibits, Universal Expedition. These exhibits were popular showings at the fair. They were well researched by educated people hailing a degree from Harvard, Yale, Columbia, and other prestigious schools. The goal of these exhibits? To prove indigenous people subhuman. The exhibit's goals were to show a timeline of the evolution of humans using races as a scale of how advanced people were. Exaggerated rituals and primitive enclosures were shown to make indigenous people look less intelligent and civilized than Europeans, all of which were boasted as innovative studies of anthropology and genetics. William McGee was the head of the fair's anthropology department. His mission in these exhibits was to show a timeline of human evolution by using live humans as examples of what he believed to be the lowest and highest stages of the human race. The conclusions of anthropology at the time stated Africans were the lowest form of evolved man and were closer to the ape than humans. St. Louis was far from alone in this practice of human displays, and Europe was the origin. These exhibits were popular in circuses and other entertainment places because people did not have films or ways to travel as easily as today, and were amused by seeing people of different cultures live in their natural state. Freak shows and touring circuses were popular spectacles in the 19th century, but they were all flashy lights and silliness. Ever seen the movie The Greatest Showman? Turns out he wasn't so great. P.T. Barnum's circus featured people he bought. Yes, bought for money. The exhibits at the fair, however, were not like circuses. McGee, on the other hand, was not some whack job carny looking for a quick buck exploiting ethnic people. He was an educated geologist, anthropologist, and theoretical evolutionist, and the president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. These exhibits at the fair weren't just entertainment. They were meant to teach the world a one-sided view of human evolution. McGee and other educated scientists used their research in exhibits and museums to showcase to the public a sort of final project of their research. They also did experiments on indigenous people. Men from Columbia University did tests to measure their facial structures, intelligence, and threshold for pain because of the belief that races were genetically different from each other. McGee once said, "The savage stands strikingly close to subhuman species in every aspect of mentality as well as in bodily habits and bodily structure." This is a perfect testament to how he wanted visitors of the fair to perceive his exhibits. He wanted to educate visitors about the savageness that lived among them and how a superior race could civilize them. According to the 1904 Anthropology Days in Olympic Games, Sport, Race, and American Imperialism, edited by Susan Bronwell, the fair had 5 major objectives. 1. To promote the city of St. Louis and demonstrate its sophistication. 3. We're gonna skip around a little bit. To demonstrate the superiority of American democracy, capitalism, and culture. 4. To celebrate industrial, social, commercial, and technological progress. This is a rather cynical way of viewing the fair, and not one expanded in many Missouri classrooms. It shows how important the human exhibits were to the fair's agenda. Additionally, the fair had a rather large collection of Philippine people, and was the pride of the fair since America had recently annexed the Philippines. This use of Filipinos for the exhibit is a blinding way of America showing its imperialism and power. Ultimately, the fair was a display of American superiority projected through the exploitation of indigenous peoples. The people exhibited in the fair thought the exhibits were meant to show share their native country's culture and society with America. Instead, it killed, degraded, and fed misconceptions. For example, from the Philippine Village exhibit alone, around 1,000 people died. Exhibit organizers tried to set up a natural village for the Philippine people to live in. This environment was meant to show spectators how the people lived. Unfortunately, the people weren't prepared for St. Louis's bipolar weather and were hit with an intense snowstorm. The fair organizers did not know the people had never seen or probably heard of snow before and did nothing to help them. Therefore, many caught pneumonia and succumbed to the illness. To make matters worse, when the people took their dead to perform traditional burial rituals, spectators gathered to watch. The fair turned their funerals into spectacles, and their mourning was made into a mockery. Local newspapers shamed their funerals as exotic and pagan rituals. But that was just the beginning. Later on, 13 Filipino people died during the fair, and none of their bodies were treated with respect. Not a single body was sent home. Some bodies were sent to the Smithsonian Museum for display, and some for scientific study. 3 bodies were kept at the fair for public viewing. This story from the Philippine Village shows a disastrous side to the fair. In addition to the physical harm these exhibits caused, the fair encouraged stereotypes and misconceptions of how Native people live. Professor Frederick W. Putnam, the head of the 1893 Columbian Exposition's Anthropology Department, considered these to be life and movement exhibits, featuring authentic native demonstrations living in appropriate habitats, demonstrating pre-industrial indigenous customs for the education of the viewers. The visitors saw the natives as barbaric and savage, even though they themselves were the ones entertained by caged humans. Additionally, visitors liked to see the Igorot tribe eat dogs. The Igorot people were viewed as highly uncivilized for their minimal clothing and dog eating. Dog eating was a practice used by this culture, but only for ceremonies. Fair leaders fed them dogs several times a day for the 8 months the fair lasted, and wildly blew dog eating out of proportion. Additionally, they made them perform traditional dances and rituals an inappropriate amount to show visitors. These appropriations and stereotypes demonstrate a cruel and bitter side of the fair. The forced rituals and fake habitats fair organizers set up were dehumanizing and careless because they did not even try to show visitors an accurate representation of these countries as promised. They used the people for a flashy spectacle and to make them look uncivilized. St. Louis also needs to understand how human zoos are embedded in the city's geography. These exhibits are the foundation of many St. Louis's landmarks and residential areas. For example, not many people know or acknowledge the human exhibits took place on the grounds of Washington University, Clayton, Concordia Cemetery, and Forest Park. Forest Park has an information website that says, the administration buildings for the fair became Washington University's Brookings. The Palace of Fine Arts was turned over to the Art Museum in 1906. Neither Washington University nor Forest Park has a memorial or plaque to commemorate the horrors of the fair, choosing only to highlight the good parts of their history. Forest Park's website does not do enough to provide an accurate account of what happened at the fair. A mere 3 sentences mention the human exhibits, and they do not provide further research or citations. Additionally, the bodies of the Filipino people who died during the fair were buried in unmarked graves at the Archdiocese of St. Louis. They now remain forgotten and uncared for as patches of dirt. This shows how the city of St. Louis has not made an effort to remember the fallen people of the fair. They have not made a memorial or acknowledgement at the Archdiocese. Furthermore, the Philippine exhibit village is now known as Clayton, land filled with million-dollar homes without the memory of the people that suffered there. Residents are ignorant of the ghosts they live on. Taking a step back from the exhibits shows how much damage was left behind. The city of St. Louis does almost nothing to properly remember the human zoos of 1904. Since most of the land used for the exhibit does not have signs or memorials, most St. Louisans do not know about the entire history of the 1904 World's Fair. However, Jana Langholz, I'm English speaker, is someone who is trying to keep the memory of the zoos alive. She carries a plaque she had made with her and leads tours meant to educate more people about the exhibits. She says, the city has done almost nothing to preserve the history and people who came here in 1904. Additionally, she has concluded the memory of these people is disrespected. To die, be displayed, then forgotten and donated. This was the path of Filipinos, Africans, and Native Americans who met their ends during the fair. More people like Jana are needed to fully remember the human zoos. Furthermore, Forest Park's website includes a supposed history of the 1904 World's Fair that boasts the glory and beauty of the park's history while watering down the truth of human exhibits. The website does nothing to explain the human exhibits and merely mentions them. The They go on about the splendor of ice cream and cotton candy, but not the human exhibits. This exclusion of crucial facts means the fair's human zoos are not explained with proper information. When credible websites do not provide thorough information, St. Louis loses important pieces of history. Moreover, recently, the popular news outlet The Atlantic published a series of photos from the 1904 World's Fair. It contained pictures of the Pike, which was a strip featuring different countries and live exhibits. Even though the article includes human zoos along with ice cream and pretty lights in its timeline, it takes a positive stance and does not demonstrate the true ongoings of live exhibits. Its format and captions are placed in a way that makes the people seem like performers happy to be bringing their culture to America. Will St. Louis ever account for everything that happened at the fair? If such an event happened to a group of Americans, there would be outrage and an annual day of remembrance. This is demonstrated in America's strong passion to remember the attacks of 9/11, which includes countless documentaries and memorials. Contrastingly, human zoos are not given another thought. Recently, in the summer of 2021, Forest Park, the same place many of the human exhibits took place, put up over 7,000 flags that paid tribute to the victims and first responders of the 9/11 attacks. Hopefully, someday the same respect and remembrance will be given to the people of the human zoos. The city should remember 9/11, but St. Louis also has a responsibility to own up to its own past. If they can take the time to set up thousands of flags for predominantly American citizens, they can put up informational signs in the park and write more than a few sentences on their website to give a fraction of justice to the thousands of indigenous people who were displayed in the 1904 World's Fair. Sadly, these tragedies had an impact on the city of St. Louis and America as a whole. One prime example is Alice. I tried to look it up. I Google translated. It's Russian. Alice. We're gonna call him Alice. Alice, a scientist who wanted bodies from the St. Louis Fair. Alice was interested in the differences between brains of different races and brought it upon himself to dissect victims of the fair. The Smithsonian Institution liked his work and put his findings and brains on display at one of their museums. Some of the brains remain there even today. Additionally, Alice is revered as the Smithsonian's first physical anthropologist and is remembered as a great scientist. Dissection further disrespects and shows how dehumanizing the fair was. Indigenous people went to America with the idea they were to share their culture at a universal fair. Instead, they were treated like animals in a zoo, mocked, killed by disease and snowstorms, and then shipped to another state so scientists could dissect them. Similarly, the mastermind of the fair's anthropology department, William McGee, is remembered as remarkable, intelligent, courageous, ambitious, and more. A fairly recent academic journal summarizes the highlights of his career and dotes on his ingenuity. McGee once said, "Love you one another." In the article, comments that he is a man of eloquence and human sympathy and understanding. It's funny how someone who claimed people should love one another could create something like the human exhibits of 1904. Furthermore, he has a mountain named after him. A mountain, a legacy, a thriving memory. These are all things McGee has that the native people brought to the fair do not. Unfortunately, the unfairness continues. The only way to honor those who died in the human zoos is to remember them and educate people about how these exhibits came to be. Although it may seem outlandish, when crucial parts of history are forgotten, humanity is bound to make the same mistakes. Moreover, forgetting human exhibits at the fair paints an unrealistic picture. It romanticizes the fair and makes modern audiences think it was all happy fun times with desserts and Ferris wheels. 1904 might have felt like ages ago, but it's 2021. 117 years is not long in the big picture. Forest Park, Clayton, Washington University, and other sites of the exhibits do not acknowledge the human zoos. Even the Missouri History Museum does not do justice to human zoos in their permanent exhibit about the 1904 World's Fair. The live exhibits are barely mentioned, even though there were several exhibits with one taking up 47 acres. Surely, the thousands of indigenous people enclosed in zoo-like habitats would invoke a museum to discuss these people more. But alas, a few paragraphs was all the space the museum could spare. Furthermore, St. Louis was just a checkpoint. The exhibits, which promoted the idea the European race is superior, can be summed up as scientific racism. Scientific racism led to the eugenics movement of the 1920s and 30s, which led to Nazi Germany. St. Louis isn't the only city to have hosted these exhibits, but it was a part of a snowball of racism that helped fuel a war. Eugenics became a popular social movement in the United States that peaked in the 1920s and 30s. Books and films promoted eugenics, which local fairs and exhibitions held fitter family and better baby competitions around the country. During the first part of the 20th century, 32 U.S. states passed laws that resulted in forced sterilization of more than 64,000 Americans. The snowball kept rolling and growing because it caused the death of over 6 million people in World War II. Adolf Hitler, one of the world's most notorious eugenicists, drew inspiration from California's forced sterilizations of the feeble-minded in designing Nazi Germany's racially based policies. Perhaps the 1904 fair's biggest downfall was its role in forming the legacy of World War II. But that's a long story for another time. After the fair, if the native people were not dead, they were taken to a zoo, circus, or other fair for further humiliation. Most never went home or saw their families again. William McGee went on to be a member of the Inland Waterways Commission, a group appointed by President Theodore Roosevelt, and president of the National Geographic Society. Overall, St. Louis can never rid itself of the events it hosted, but it can remember them. The memory of the savages is currently hidden under sparkling lights in a beautiful basin, and it is St. Louis's job to recover it. We must remember.